The hum of the main array was my only constant companion. It vibrated through the floorboards, a low, resonant thrum that had become the rhythm of my solitary existence in the observatory. I called it home, though it was little more than a collection of metal, glass, and circuit boards perched on a desolate peak, far from any other light or life. The air here always carried a faint tang of ozone and chilled metal, a scent that now felt as natural to me as breath. My hands, calloused from years of adjusting delicate instruments, moved with practiced ease over the console. Each button press, each dial turn was a familiar dance, a meticulous routine that kept the universe within my reach, or so I believed. My days bled into nights, marked only by the shifting patterns on my multiple monitors. Lines, graphs, numerical readouts, the cosmic symphony translated into cold, hard data. For years, it had been a predictable, if endlessly complex, pursuit. My life was defined by precision, by the elegant certainties of physics. Today, though, a subtle dissonance had crept into the symphony. A faint, almost imperceptible flicker on the primary long-range scan, a blip that shouldn't have been there, not in that sector, not with that signature. I leaned closer, my breath fogging the cool glass of the screen. The flickering was so slight, easily dismissible as background noise, a stray cosmic ray, even a minor instrument malfunction. My training, my entire career demanded skepticism. I ran a diagnostic, the system whirring softly in response. The lights on the console pulsed green, then settled back to a steady amber, all systems nominal. The flicker remained. I felt a prickle of unease, a sensation like static electricity across my scalp. This was something else. My fingers flew across the keyboard, isolating the coordinates, narrowing the sensor's focus. To find anything there, let alone a persistent signal, was statistically improbable to the point of impossibility. The observatory's ancient, massive dish swiveled with a groan that echoed faintly through the reinforced walls, aligning itself with the distant, almost empty patch of sky. The image on my screen sharpened, the noise floor dropping, revealing the persistent flicker with unsettling clarity. It wasn't a random burst. It had a rhythm. I initiated a spectral analysis. Watching the energy distribution graph populate, my pulse hammered against my ribs, a sudden, rapid beat that felt out of place in the quiet room. The data coalesced, forming a peak, then another, then a series of distinct, repeating frequencies. It was structured, impossibly so, like a language or a code meticulously woven into the fabric of the signal itself. This wasn't nature. This was design, and it was coming from a place so astronomically distant, so utterly barren, that no known civilization, no natural phenomenon could possibly account for it. I felt a strange pressure behind my eyes, as if my optic nerves were straining to comprehend what my brain refused to accept. The signal was not merely an anomaly, it was an affront. It defied every principle I had ever learned, every law I had ever trusted. It was too old, too far, too ordered. I tried to verify the signal with independent arrays, cross-referencing with other observatories, but my isolated position meant I was largely on my own. The nearest human contact was miles away, and they dealt with the terrestrial, not the cosmic. As I worked, the sky outside the panoramic window began to lighten, a pale bruise of dawn spreading across the eastern horizon. Below, in the valley, I could just make out the skeletal outlines of an empty ski resort, the lifts swaying idly in the July heat. Mechanical arms reaching for nothing. They looked like forgotten sentinels, silent and still. The contrast between that inert, deserted human construction and the impossibly vibrant, ancient signal I was witnessing was jarring, a sudden, sharp splinter in my ordered world. What was I looking at? What kind of intelligence could broadcast across such unimaginable distances, from such an ancient epoch, with such deliberate structure? And what did it mean? That such a thing could exist, silent and unnoticed, in the vast, empty spaces between everything. My hands trembled as I saved the data, the weight of the universe suddenly feeling less like a grand mystery and more like a crushing, alien presence. I called it home, though it was little more than a collection of metal, glass, and circuit boards perched on a mountain, overlooking the empty ski resort, July heat, lifts swaying. The abandoned chairs creaked faintly in the hot wind, their empty seats swinging like ghosts. Dust motes danced in the slivers of sunlight that pierced the grimy windows, illuminating the chaos of my workstation. Days blurred into nights, marked only by the shifting quality of the light and the growing mound of empty coffee mugs. My fingers ached, stiff from hours spent hunched over the consoles, eyes burning. The signal, a series of precise, structured pulses, scrolled across the main screen in a dizzying array of graphs and numerical sequences. It wasn't noise. It wasn't a natural phenomenon. The patterns were too intricate, too deliberate. Each pulse, each pause seemed to carry an embedded weight, a coded message waiting to be unlocked. I started with basic frequency analysis, then moved to more complex algorithms, searching for any terrestrial analog, any familiar echo in the vast silence between galaxies. There was none. The data resisted every attempt to categorize it within known physics. It was like trying to measure the color of sound. The air in the control room grew thick with the smell of ozone and my own stale sweat. I hadn't showered in days. My stomach growled, a hollow ache that I ignored. Food was a distraction. Sleep was a weakness. The signal was everything. I found myself tracing the patterns with my finger on the screen, feeling the cool glass against my skin, as if proximity might somehow grant me understanding. It wasn't just complex, it was impossibly so. Not merely a series of repeating numbers, but a fractal-like progression, patterns within patterns, each layer revealing a deeper, more unsettling order. It felt like peering into the heart of a cosmic clockwork, where every gear was turning with an incomprehensible purpose. I began to isolate recurring sequences, treating them like glyphs in an unknown script. There were short bursts that appeared consistently, always preceded by a certain frequency shift, always followed by another. I called them primers and terminators. Then came the longer strings, intricate arrangements that seemed to build upon these basic elements, forming what I could only describe as phrases. My mind, accustomed to the elegant simplicity of universal constants, buckled under the weight of this alien grammar. It wasn't random, but its logic was entirely foreign. Every attempt to apply terrestrial linguistic model substitution ciphers, frequency analysis of common letters, even statistical correlations yielded nothing but static. Outside, the July heat shimmered over the empty ski resort. The metal of the distant lift towers gleamed, distorted by the rising thermals. My own season felt forgotten. My reality had shrunk to the glowing screens and the relentless, hypnotic flow of the signal. My throat was dry, a persistent scratchiness that no amount of lukewarm coffee could soothe. Then I found it, a segment buried deep within a particularly dense sequence that repeated not exactly but with subtle, almost imperceptible variations. It was like a theme in a musical score, returning with different instrumentation, different tempo, yet undeniably the same core idea. This wasn't a cosmic accident. This was an intentional variation, a subtle inflection. It spoke of meaning, of intent. My hands trembled, my breath hitched. This wasn't a natural broadcast from a pulsar or a distant quasar. This was communication. If it was communication, it meant intelligence. I traced the pattern again, its elegant, impossible structure marking every scientific principle I held dear. It felt like a language designed to be utterly unlearnable by human minds, yet undeniably a language. My vision blurred for a moment, not from fatigue, but from the sheer, overwhelming scale of the discovery. My fingers hovered over the controls. What did these phrases mean? What was it trying to say? The observatory was silent save for the constant hum. The wind outside picked up, rattling the loose panels on the roof. I heard the distant, mournful groan of the swaying ski lifts, a sound that usually brought a sense of desolate calm. I focused on the signal, zooming into the recurring theme. With a sickening jolt, I noticed something else. Within the variations, subtle distortions. Not random noise, but precise alterations. They weren't errors, they were corrections. The pattern wasn't just repeating, it was being refined, adjusted, like an artist meticulously altering a masterpiece. But what was being corrected? What fundamental law of existence was so imperfect it required such alien, deliberate revision? The hum of the main array had been my only constant companion. I called it home, though it was little more than a collection of metal, glass, and circuit boards perched on a desolate peak. But the signal, impossibly ancient, structured in a way that defied all known physics, had broken that rhythm. It pulsed not just through the circuits, but through my skull, demanding answers that my instruments couldn't provide. I packed my bag, the silence of my departure a stark contrast to the thrumming I left behind. My research, frantic and obsessive, had led me down an unexpected path. The signal's patterns, when stripped of their astronomical data, echoed something else entirely, something primordial, a forgotten whisper from the deep past. I needed to consult sources beyond the peer-reviewed journals, texts that spoke of fears older than humanity itself. My search culminated in a single, cryptic address, scribbled on a faded business card I'd found tucked into a dusty volume on pre-Sumerian cosmology. It led me to an empty ski resort, July heat, lifts swaying. The drive was long, the landscape shifting from sparse forest to sun-baked rock. When the resort finally came into view, it was a tableau of forgotten ambition. Chairlifts, bleached bone-white by the sun, hung motionless, their empty seats swaying with a mournful, creaking rhythm in the hot breeze. The slopes, usually a vibrant green or stark white, were now a brittle yellow, crisscrossed with cracks. A smell of dry pine needles and baked asphalt hung in the air, thick and still. My throat felt parched. It pressed against my eardrums. The address pointed to a smaller, older building tucked away behind the main lodge, half hidden by overgrown conifers. It looked like a forgotten storage shed, expanded over decades with haphazard additions of corrugated metal and rough-hewn timber. A single, hand-painted sign, faded and peeling, read Curiosities and Obscurities. I pushed open the heavy wooden door. It groaned on rusted hinges, exhaling a cloud of dust and the cloying scent of aged paper, beeswax, and something faintly metallic, like old coins left out in the rain. Inside, the space was a labyrinth of towering shelves, overflowing with books, scrolls, and strange, unidentifiable artifacts. Dim light filtered through a single, grimy skylight, illuminating dancing motes of dust. The air was thick, tasting of mildew and neglect. My fingers brushed against rough, woven tapestries hanging like shrouds, their patterns indistinct in the gloom. I called out, my voice swallowed by the dense atmosphere. From behind a stack of teetering folios, a figure emerged. The antiquarian. Their face was a roadmap of wrinkles, their eyes, a startling pale blue, seemed to see through me, not at me. "You are expected," the antiquarian rasped, their voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement. They didn't ask how I found them or what I wanted. They simply knew. A shiver traced its way up my spine. The signal, yes, it speaks of corrections. My breath caught. "How do you know about the signal?" I asked, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. The antiquarian merely smiled, a slow, unsettling parting of lips that revealed teeth too yellow, too sharp. "Some truths are older than the instruments that seek them. They are etched into the foundations of things. Come." They turned, their movements surprisingly spry, navigating the treacherous aisles with practiced ease. I followed, my heart racing a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The floorboards creaked under my weight, a symphony of decay. The antiquarians stopped before a section of shelf crammed with leather-bound tomes, their spines cracked and brittle. They pulled out a book, larger and heavier than the rest, its cover adorned with a symbol I didn't recognize, a jagged, angular form that seemed to twist in on itself. "This is not for the faint of heart, nor the uninitiated," the antiquarian warned, their pale eyes fixed on mine. "It speaks of the great unraveling of the fabric torn." They placed the heavy tome on a scarred wooden table. Dust motes danced in the shaft of light from the skylight. The pages, thick and yellowed, felt like ancient skin. As I turned them, a faint, sweet smell, like dried blood and forgotten incense, wafted up. The text was in no language I recognized, a series of elegant, alien glyphs. But beneath them, crude, disturbing illustrations depicted cosmic scenes. Stars were not spheres of light, but gaping wounds. Galaxies were not spirals of order, but chaotic tangles of raw, screaming energy. And then I saw it. A diagram, intricately drawn, almost like a circuit board, but composed of impossible angles and non-Euclidean geometry. It depicted the universe as a vast, delicate tapestry, and in the center, a symbol. It was the signal. Beneath the diagram, a short passage in a script that looked vaguely Proto-Sumerian, but distorted, almost corrupted. My mind struggled to process the implications. This wasn't a myth. This was a pre-human civilization's terrified understanding of something that existed. My stomach churned, a wave of nausea twisting through me. The air in the room suddenly felt too thin, too hot, too heavy, a memory of what was and what will be again. Their breath, stale and sweet, ghosted across my cheek. I looked at the diagram again, the intricate lines of the signal marking my scientific understanding. It wasn't just a pattern of energy. It was a blueprint, a fundamental alien instruction. But what was it correcting, And what would happen when the correction was complete? The antiquarian's smile had been a rictus, a predatory hint beneath the veneer of humanity. I walked away from his shop, the scent of aged paper and something acrid like burnt bone clinging to my clothes. The afternoon sun, usually a comforting warmth, felt like a spotlight exposing me. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a frantic drummer against the fragile cage of my flesh. His words echoed, "Some truths are older than the instruments that seek them. They are etched into the found at." He'd stopped there, a deliberate truncation, leaving the rest to fester in my mind. I fumbled for my keys, the metal cool against my sweating palm. The street, a familiar stretch of cracked pavement and fading awnings, seemed sharper. Colors were too vibrant, edges too defined. I blamed the lingering adrenaline, the shock of the encounter. But then I saw it. My own car, parked exactly where I'd left it, had a small ceramic owl perched on its dashboard. It was a cheap, kitschy thing, the kind sold at roadside stalls. I didn't own a ceramic owl. I had never owned a ceramic owl. I stood there staring at it, the absurdity of it a small, sharp pinprick in the growing balloon of my dread. I looked away, then back. It was still there, unmoving, its painted eyes fixed forward. A trick of the light, a prank. No one ever touched my car. I unlocked the door, my hand shaking. The owl remained, silent, undeniably present. My fingers brushed the cold plastic of the dash. It was real. I picked it up, its glazed surface smooth beneath my touch. I placed it on the passenger seat, a bizarre passenger. My breath hitched. Was this the beginning of something, or was I just losing my grip? Back in my apartment, the air hung heavy and still, thick with the July heat. I tried to focus on the signal data, the impossible patterns still flowing across my screens, but my eyes kept darting to the periphery. The edge of the bookshelf seemed to ripple, a shadow cast by a stack of journals bent at an angle that defied the single overhead light. I blinked, it snapped back. My vision, I told myself, was playing tricks. Exhaustion, stress. The antiquarian had gotten to me. As I lifted the glass, the reflection in the polished surface of the table caught my eye, not my face, but a momentary flicker. A geometric pattern, impossibly complex, like the signal itself, etched into the space where my reflection should have been. It pulsed, a brief internal luminescence, then vanished, replaced by my own tired features. I gasped, nearly dropping the glass. My heart thrummed, a frantic bird trapped in my chest. I stared at the table, then at the glass, then back. Nothing, just the faint ring of condensation, but I had seen it. I had seen it. The air tasted metallic, like fear. The following morning, I found myself drawn to the edge of the city, seeking a desolate quiet. I needed to clear my head, to prove to myself that the world was still sane. I drove until the roads thinned and the buildings gave way to overgrown fields, until I reached the empty ski resort, July heat, lifts swaying. The skeletal structures of the chairlifts climbed the sun-baked mountain, their empty seats swinging idly in a non-existent breeze, creaking a mournful, metallic song. The air shimmered above the asphalt, distorting the distant peaks. I parked and stepped out, the dry, dusty scent of parched earth and sun-scorched pine needles filling my nostrils. A single broken ski pole lay half-buried in the cracked asphalt of the parking lot, its bright yellow grip faded to a dull mustard. I walked towards it, my boots crunching on loose gravel. I knelt, tracing the worn plastic with my finger. It was real, tangible. I stood up, feeling the immense scale of the empty resort, the silent witnesses of the dormant lifts. I turned back towards my car and then I stopped. The ski pole was gone. The spot where it had been was bare, just cracked asphalt. Ice flooded my veins. My breath hitched in my throat. I spun around, scanning the parking lot, the dusty roadside. It was nowhere. I walked back, my steps slow, deliberate, my eyes sweeping every inch of the ground. Not a trace. This wasn't exhaustion. This wasn't a trick of the light. This was a deliberate erasure. The world was not just shifting, it was actively mocking me. The lifts above me groaned, a long, drawn-out metallic cry, as if the mountain itself was sighing. I looked up at the swaying chairs, wondering what unseen force moved them with such an uncanny rhythm. That night, sleep offered no escape. My dreams were not dreams, they were intrusions. Then patterns began to emerge. Not the clean, elegant geometries of my signal, but a twisting, impossible architecture that defied all known physics. Lines that curved inward on themselves, planes that intersected without touching, angles that were simultaneously acute and obtuse. The patterns shifted, reconfigured, always resolving into something just beyond my comprehension, something that felt wrong. I saw the signal, not as data on a screen, but as a living, breathing entity, a colossal, intricate machine, slowly, deliberately, unraveling the very fabric of existence. I could feel its gaze, ancient and indifferent, sweeping over me, assessing, cataloging. I was a speck, a single molecule in a universe it sought to correct. My skin prickled, aware. I pushed myself up, my muscles aching, my head throbbing. It wasn't just a nightmare. It had been a direct experience, a glimpse behind the veil. But what was it trying to show me, and why? My pulse hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the silence of the street. I needed answers, something concrete to anchor me, to pull me back from the abyss that felt like it was opening at my feet. The signal, my signal, was more than just a discovery. It was a key, and I was terrified of what it might unlock. My journey north was a blur of highway and simmering anxiety. The air conditioning in my car fought a losing battle against the July heat that pressed against the windows, a suffocating blanket. The further I drove, the more the world thinned out, becoming a canvas of sun-baked fields and skeletal trees. My destination was remote, tucked away in the highest reaches of the mountains, an empty ski resort, July heat, lifts swaying. It was a place designed for winter, for snow and laughter, now abandoned to the relentless sun. The winding road up the mountain was cracked, overgrown with weeds. Dust motes danced in the harsh sunlight filtering through the pines. Rust bloomed on the railings, a virulent orange against the faded paint. Above me, the ski lifts hung like gallows, their metal chairs swaying gently in a phantom breeze, creaking a low, mournful song that scraped against the stillness. Each swing felt like a pendulum, counting down to something I couldn't name. The air tasted dry, metallic, like old pennies. I found the academic's cabin nestled deeper in the woods, a small, ramshackle structure clinging to the hillside. It was almost swallowed by the overgrown foliage, as if the forest itself was trying to reclaim it. A faint smell of wood smoke, incongruous in the summer heat, hung around the porch. I knocked. The wood felt soft, spongy under my knuckles. No answer, my hand trembled. Was I doing the right thing? Was this even the right place? A rasping cough from inside startled me. Then a shuffling sound, slow and deliberate. The academic, a gaunt figure with a wild mane of silver hair, peered out. The smell of old books, stale coffee, and something else, something sharp and chemical, emanated from the dim interior. "I shouldn't be here," the academic rasped, their voice dry as autumn leaves. "No one should." I introduced myself, my voice sounding strangely loud in the quiet air. I spoke of my work, of the signal, watching their face for a flicker of recognition, a sign that they understood. They simply stared, their gaze unnervingly steady, piercing through me. "The patterns," they finally muttered, a dry chuckle escaping their lips. "Always the patterns." They stepped aside, allowing me to enter. The cabin was a chaotic archive, overflowing with books, papers, and strange diagrams tacked to every available surface. The floorboards groaned under my weight, each step a protest. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of sunlight that pierced a grimy window, illuminating the disarray. They gestured vaguely towards a stack of aged tomes, their covers brittle with time. "The universe, Marcus, is a tapestry. We perceive the threads, the colors, but what if the loom itself is unraveling?" My breath hitched. They had understood. They knew. They began to speak, their words a flood of fragmented insights, ancient philosophies, and arcane cosmology, yet laced with a terrifying coherence. It is a reverberation of them. And in their being, they impose their own truth. They rewrite the very grammar of existence. What we perceive as reality, as stable, as fixed, it is merely a consensus, a fragile agreement. The air grew heavy, thick with unspoken horrors. The faint scent of ozone now mingled with the academic's dusty scent, a strange electrical tang. "The patterns I found," the academic said, their gaze locking onto mine, "they are not mathematical formulae. They are stains, imperfections, signs of the unraveling. They begin subtly. A shift in causality, a whisper in the void that alters the very nature of light. They infect our perception, our understanding. The rules we live by, the laws of physics, the very constants of the universe, they become fluid." The academic rose, their movements surprisingly fluid for their age, and pointed a trembling finger towards one of the diagrams on the wall. "Not as chaos, no, but as a new, terrible order. Have I begun to hear the echoes of a language that was never spoken?" The patterns, the colleague had muttered, their voice a dry whisper that seemed to scratch the air. A dream, Marcus, or a nightmare? Their gaze had been too steady, too deep. It had burrowed into me, leaving a chill that lingered long after I'd left their sterile office, the fluorescent hum a dull ache in my skull. I had seen recognition there, a flicker of something ancient in their eyes, quickly veiled. Or perhaps it was just my own mind straining. The choice of location was almost unconscious, a primal pull towards desolate heights. I found myself at an empty ski resort, July heat, lifts swaying. The sun beat down, turning the metal chairs into shimmering, warped plastic ghosts. Dust motes danced in the thick, still air. A faint, metallic tang, like old blood and ozone, coated my tongue. Sweat slicked my skin, clinging to my shirt, but I barely noticed. My equipment was set up in the shadow of a maintenance shed, the satellite dish pointing to the sky like a hungry ear. Each sway was a sigh, a slow, deliberate breath. The sound counted seconds, marking the slow unraveling of my own resolve. I plugged in my headphones. I had spent weeks, months, mapping its frequencies, breaking down its structure, convinced it was a universal constant, a cosmic fingerprint. Now, after the colleague's unsettling words, I approached it differently. Less like a puzzle, more like a conversation I was desperate to join. I adjusted the filters, isolating the rhythmic pulses I'd previously dismissed as background noise, focusing on the subtle shifts in amplitude and phase. My fingers flew across the console, tracing patterns on the screen, translating the raw data into visual and auditory representations. The complex algorithms I'd designed began to hum, processing the deluge of information. The signal wasn't just organized, it was layered. Each pulse wasn't a single data point, but a chord, a series of interwoven frequencies that resonated with each other, shifting and evolving. It was a symphony without instruments, without musicians, without a conductor, yet it moved. It felt like cold water seeping into my marrow. My hands trembled slightly on the controls. The patterns on the screen, once abstract representations, began to coalesce into something almost melodic. A low thrum, deep enough to vibrate in my chest, underscored higher keening tones that seemed to stretch into infinity. It wasn't music as I understood it. It was something far older, far more fundamental. Then it changed. A specific sequence, one I'd cataloged but never fully understood, began to loop, repeating with subtle variations. It wasn't random. It was a phrase, a motif, and it was directed. It felt like a spotlight, suddenly aimed at me, even through the vastness of interstellar space. The air grew heavy, thick with unseen pressure. My breath hitched. The metallic taste in my mouth intensified, sharp and bitter. This wasn't just a signal. This was an utterance, a song. My mind, once a fortress of scientific method, began to fracture under the assault of pure, unfiltered meaning. The song wasn't encoded data. It was direct transmission. It spoke not in symbols, but in concepts, in feelings, in a vast, terrifying intent. I felt it, a profound awareness of correction, not repair but an undoing, a fundamental reweaving of what is. The subtle shifts in the melody conveyed an ancient, patient dissatisfaction, a desire for order that transcended human understanding of chaos. The world outside, the empty ski resort, the swaying lifts, all seemed to blur, losing their hard edges as the song consumed my perception. It spoke of foundations, of the very bedrock of reality, and it spoke of dismantling, of a quiet, methodical unraveling of the threads that held everything together. My own existence felt suddenly flimsy, a paper doll in a hurricane. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the slow, deliberate rhythm of the song. What could such a consciousness hope to gain from such an act, and why was it speaking to me? The colleague's words clung to me, a damp shroud, a dream. Marcus or a nightmare. They'd burrowed deep, festering. I had to escape the sterile hum, the fluorescent glare that seemed to bleach reality. I drove, aimless at first, until the road sign for the empty ski resort pulled me, a silent, insistent whisper in the back of my mind. July heat pressed down, thick and suffocating as I stepped out of the car. The air was still, heavy with the scent of sun-baked pine needles and dry earth. Above me, the ski lifts swayed, empty chairs creaking a mournful rhythm in the faint breeze. They hung like forgotten skeletons, their metal frames gleaming dully under the relentless sun, casting long, distorted shadows across the dusty slopes. The silence here wasn't peaceful. It was a vast, watchful absence, broken only by the chirring of unseen insects and the rhythmic clank creak of the lifts. I started walking, drawn towards the nearest lift station. Dust puffed around my worn boots with each step. The rusted metal of the support pylons was hot to the touch, radiating a dry, metallic heat that seemed to seep into my bones. My skin prickled, aware of the vast, open space, the silent, observing mountains. I ran a hand over a weathered wooden bench, its surface rough and splintered. Had I heard something? A faint, scraping sound like metal on rock, echoing from the highest reaches of the resort. I spun around, scanning the bleached slopes. Nothing, just the swaying lifts. The patterns, they started subtly at first. In the crisscrossing rust on a lift cable, I saw a familiar geometric complexity, the impossible symmetry that had consumed my every waking thought. I blinked. The rust was just rust, a random decay. But then, as I squinted against the glare, the patterns reappeared, shifting, almost breathing within the corrosion. Nausea twisted through me. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them. The cable was still. The patterns were gone. Was I already seeing things? I walked further, past the abandoned ticket booth, its windows opaque with grime and dust. The air inside smelled stale, like forgotten paper and mildew. Out on the main slope, the ground was a patchwork of dry grass and exposed rock, scarred by the dormant runs. The lifts overhead continued their slow, rhythmic sway, each creak a distinct note in the desolate symphony. My breath hitched. One of the chairs, high up, seemed to turn slowly, deliberately, as if an unseen rider had just shifted their weight. My heart lurched. I stared, fixated. The chair hung motionless. It had been the wind, of course. It had to be the wind. I felt watched, not just by the empty resort, but by something else, something vast and unseen. The air tasted metallic, sharp with fear. I began to pick up my pace, a frantic energy coursing through me. They were everywhere now, in the cracks of the asphalt path, in the way the sunlight fractured through the sparse pine needles, in the very texture of the bleached rock faces. They were not static. They pulsed. They shifted. A low hum began to resonate in my ears, not from the environment, but from within my skull. It vibrated behind my eyes, a deep, unsettling thrum that made my teeth ache. I pressed my palms to my temples, trying to push it out, but it only intensified, morphing into a discordant chord. A symphony of impossible frequencies. The world around me shimmered. The distant mountains seemed to ripple, their solid forms blurring at the edges. Was I awake, or had the colleague been right? Was this the nightmare? The patterns flared, overlaying everything like a transparent, shifting grid imposed upon reality. They pulsed, faster now, brighter, their impossible geometry twisting and reforming. And then I saw it. It was a glimpse into impossible dimensions. A flash of something vast and utterly alien, composed entirely of the shifting patterns, but alive, undeniably alive. My legs gave out. I fell to my knees, gasping for breath, the hum in my head now a roar. My skin crawled. The entity wasn't just influencing the signal or the distant stars. It was inside me, warping my very perception, eroding the boundaries of my sanity. The empty ski resort, the July heat. The lifts swaying, they were all just backdrops to the horror unfolding within my own skull. Was anything real anymore? I drove, aimless at first, until the road sign for the empty ski resort pulled me, a silent, insistent call. I found the empty ski resort, a skeleton bleached by the July heat. The lifts swayed, ghost pendulums against a sky that felt too vast, too indifferent. Dust coated everything, the ticket booths, the vacant chalets, the very air itself. My tires crunched on gravel, a lonely sound. The sun beat down, a heavy blanket. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence pressed in, broken only by the mournful, metallic groan of a distant chairlift swaying on its cable. A faint, dry scent of parched pine needles and baked asphalt hung in the air. I needed to think, to find a logic beyond the unraveling. I stepped out, the heat wrapping around me, thick and stifling. My shirt stuck to my back immediately. The air tasted gritty like fine sand. I walked towards the base of the main slope, my boots kicking up puffs of dust. The chairs, empty and rusted, moved with a slow, uneven rhythm, a creak and a groan, then a pause, then another creak. There was no breeze, not really, just a faint shimmer above the asphalt that distorted the distant mountains. Yet the lifts continued their mournful dance, a movement without cause. It felt wrong, profoundly so. Was it just the lingering memory of the wind, or something else entirely? I tried to dismiss it, to attribute the strange swaying to thermal currents or ancient, ill-maintained machinery, but the feeling persisted, a subtle wrongness in the very fabric of the air. I climbed higher towards the first lift station, the metal stairs hot beneath my hand. The quiet was immense, a silence that felt heavy, not empty. I stopped, looking back down the slope, and then I felt it. A momentary shift in my own weight, a peculiar lightness in my steps, as if the ground beneath me had briefly lost its purchase. My stomach lurched. Had I just imagined that? I gripped the railing, my grip tight. The ground felt solid again, but the memory of that strange, momentary levity lingered, a phantom sensation in my bones. They wavered, not with the natural flicker of heat haze, but with a subtle, internal tremor, like water disturbed by an unseen stone. The distant hum of the world, usually a low thrum of distant traffic or electricity, was gone. Only the desolate creak of the lifts remained, now sounding closer, more insistent. My pulse hammered against my ribs. Something was happening, something beyond the simple decay of an abandoned place. I walked faster now, a knot tightening in my chest. The air grew heavier, pressing against my eardrums, then suddenly thin, making me gasp for breath. It was like moving through water, then through a vacuum in rapid, sickening succession. My inner ear rebelled, sending nausea twisting through me. My vision blurred at the periphery, the distant mountains shimmering not from heat, but from a distortion that warped their familiar contours. They seemed to stretch, then compress like an image on a faulty screen. The metallic taste of fear coated my tongue, sharp and acrid. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't fatigue. Then the ground shuddered beneath my feet. Not an earthquake, not a rumble from deep within the earth, but a vibration that felt superficial, as if the very surface of the world was rippling. Small pebbles around my boots began to dance, skittering across the cracked asphalt. I looked up. The empty ski resort, July heat, lifts swaying, they were now swaying with an unnatural violence, the cables groaning like tortured beasts. The sky above me, once a clear, indifferent blue, now held a faint, almost imperceptible haze, a bruise of color that wasn't cloud or smoke. It was a visual anomaly, a stain on the perfect canvas of reality. I stumbled, catching myself on a rusted support beam. The air around me crackled, not with static electricity, but with a sensation deeper, more fundamental. It felt like the very atoms were vibrating out of sync. The distant bruise in the sky expanded, slowly, silently, bleeding into the blue. It wasn't just approaching, it was unfolding. The signal. Impossible, ancient signal wasn't just a transmission. It was a presence, an influence that was actively reshaping the world around me, bending the laws of physics as easily as I bent a piece of paper. The entity wasn't coming, it was here. Its corrections had begun. The ground beneath me groaned, a low, guttural sound that vibrated up through my legs, into my spine. The air grew impossibly dense, then impossibly light again, a sickening rhythm that threatened to tear me apart. My vision swam. The lifts high above shrieked as their cables stretched, then snapped, one by one, with sounds like cracking bone. The chairs plummeted, striking the slope with dull thuds. The sky was no longer blue at all, but a swirling vortex of impossible colors, a tapestry of greens and purples that defied all logic. The world was unraveling. What would be left when it was done?